Hey guys, it's Phil Morrison. I have my own coaching business where I help naturally quiet people to overcome social anxiety, play to their strengths, and thrive in life. In today's video, I'm going to explain the origin of the inner critic, the voice of self-doubt, the internal demon that says you're worthless, you're rubbish, you're unattractive, unlovable, stupid, incompetent. I'm sure you know the voice. We all have one, me included. It's also known as imposter syndrome, the inner bully, and many other names. So I'm going to explain where it comes from. First, I want you to imagine that this white circle right here, this represents a baby that's just been born. The white colour is the light of consciousness. Okay? So this represents a baby. And this is the light of consciousness. The baby has a fundamental drive based on the genetics, the DNA, to survive. So its biological drive is survival. It first learns that it can't survive by itself. Unable to find food, unable to find shelter, unable to avoid dangers of this world. Quickly learns that it's entirely dependent on caregivers for survival. So this larger circle represents parents, caregivers. Just going to label it now. Parents. So the child realizes that the bond between itself and its parents is essential for survival. So the first formula for survival that the child develops is that as long as this bond is maintained, it's going to survive. In other words, keeping your parents happy equals survival. But if your parents were to turn on you and this bond was to be severed, then you might die. And what the child realizes is that not all of its behaviors are rewarded. Sure, many of them are responded to with, are met with unconditional love in response, but not all of the behaviors. Certain behaviors, for example, being angry and throwing a tantrum, being rude, selfish, certain traits result in disapproval from the parents. And if this disapproval is extreme, for example, neglect, or it results in loud shouting and screaming, in the mind of the baby, this is a life-threatening situation. It's traumatic because if this situation was to continue in this direction, the bond might get permanently severed, the baby might be abandoned and ultimately die. So the first model of survival is that the baby has to just be itself to survive. But it quickly learns that this is risky, and actually the bond isn't unconditional, it's conditional. So this is what happens in response. So this is the baby again. So the baby suppresses behaviors, emotions, responses that result in disapproval from the parents, because this is a survival threat in the mind of the baby. And it develops this idea of a good self and a bad self. And the second model of survival, which the baby formulates, is that as long as I express the good parts of me and repress the bad parts, survival is all but guaranteed. So this is the second model of survival that the baby comes to. Just going to complete this diagram. There's the bond again, and then as long as this is the case, the baby expresses the good parts of its consciousness, represses the bad parts of its personality. It's going to result in survival. And now we're going to scroll down. But what if the baby tries its absolute best? Oops, just going to fill this in. So the baby is repressing all the supposed bad parts of its personality. This is known as the shadow self, by the way, the unconscious parts of you, the splinter personality that we all secretly have. So the baby tries its absolute best to please and get approval from the parents. But even then, in spite of the best efforts, the end result is neglect, being shouted at, being shut down, being shamed, being made to feel not good enough. If this is the case, rather than the baby assume that the parents have flaws, because if the baby assumes this, it might equal death, because it has to rely on the parents. So rather than assume that the parents have flaws, the baby instead idealizes the parents, views them as perfect, and thinks there must be something wrong with me. I'm meeting all this criteria to the best of my ability, and I'm still not receiving guaranteed approval, love, and support. I'm being shouted at, I'm being ignored, I'm not being looked after. Holy crap, I might die here. So what happens is the baby creates this fictitious bond to the parents. I'm going to do this in a slightly different colour to differentiate it. And this fictitious bond is known as a fantasy bond. Fantasy bond. And the fantasy bond is a bit like a mirage in a desert. It's false hope. It's where the baby thinks, well, I'm trying my best to meet all this criteria, to please my parents, and failing to do so. There must be something wrong with me. There must be something fundamentally wrong with me. And if I'm able to work on these flaws that I have and fix them, then this bond will be maintained and I'm guaranteed to survive. So the baby starts to insult itself, or the child starts to insult itself. For example, I'm really, really stupid. If I wasn't stupid, I would have been met with love, support, and care for my parents in this moment. I must be really, really ugly, but maybe one day I'll become better looking and this bond will return to what it should be. This ideal fantasy of always being bonded and always getting approval from the parents. In other words, having survival under your control. As long as you do X, Y, and Z, you're guaranteed to get approval and therefore guaranteed to survive. So as long as I can overcome these flaws, then I'm able to survive. And this makes sense because it's better to have hope than no hope. So the baby imagines that there's something wrong with his or herself and creates this fantasy bond with the parents. And this is where the inner critic comes from. It's keeping false hope alive. That's what it's for. So basically, I'll just complete this diagram. I'll write equals survival. So basically, this is actually an impossible situation. It's impossible to rectify this situation because the baby was genuinely doing the best it could in the situation. And parents are not perfect. Parents have flaws just like we all do. So this is a fantasy as opposed to reality. And this is where the inner critic comes from. So what happens is this wiring is actually stored inside our brains. And it's almost like we carry our parents around with us inside our head. And often the voices that tell you that you're worthless, you're rubbish, they actually come from situations where you was either told off or neglected by your parents. A psychologist, a very, very respected one, said that there's around 25,000 hours of cassette tape inside our brain involving these inner voices, and it all comes back to incidents with our parents when we were told off or ignored in some way. So this is where the inner critic comes from. Situations where you tried your absolute best to get approval from your parents, but in spite of trying your absolute best, you still weren't good enough in your mind. In another video, I'm going to explain exactly how you can learn to deal with the inner critic, because it's super important for happiness, dealing with the inner critic itself. There's lots of things you can do to learn to take this particular voice less seriously. And also, I'll teach you about shadow work and regaining access to these frozen and hidden parts of your personality so that you can own yourself to a greater extent, bring more light into your own life, and be a lot happier, a lot more confident, and suffer with anxiety and fear much less. I hope that you enjoyed this video and you got value from it. And if you're interested, through my coaching business, I offer the first one-to-one coaching session, which is over a video call for 2 hours, completely free of charge. This is a goodwill gesture so that I can help out lots of people who suffer with anxiety, depression, all these different issues. And it's also so that you can experience what my coaching's like before deciding if you want to do more sessions. So if you're interested in trying a free first session, reach out to me via my email. I'll write it here. My email address. This is my doctor's handwriting, so I'll try my best to make it neat. So it's Phil Morrison 678 at gmail.com. So just shoot me an email and I'll let you know a bunch of time slots which I have available for the following month, and you can choose one which fits with your schedule and the focus of the session. So it's me helping you to be less run by irrational fears and limiting beliefs. So I try to identify how the voices in your head, the fear, limiting beliefs, are holding you back from being happier and making you more anxious. And I help you to change the relationship that you have with your anxiety, so that you can be more confident being yourself, learn to play to the natural strengths that you have, and thrive in your life rather than just cope. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to making more videos in this style to educate people about these super interesting topics. Alright, bye.